So there's a huge issue in the music licensing business that doesn't seem to get a lot of attention, but it's definitely potentially a real big headache that you could be facing if you're not aware of this issue. And if you don't protect yourself, it can completely destroy your entire career. It absolutely can. And that is copyright infringement. When you are sort of following references from, let's say, a library that wants you to make a song in the style of some pop artist or some charting artist or some very recognizable song, or any song actually that's been copyrighted. But more often it's from, like a sort of a pop track that is very recognizable. I've had a friend in the licensing business go through this, where their library is getting cease and desist letters for tracks that he himself actually created, even though he didn't want to get that close to the reference track, but the library was saying, please get closer to the reference track. And he's facing, and his library is facing, potential lawsuits because of this stuff. I have not personally dealt with something like this, but that's because also when I am asked to get something really close to, an actual copyrighted song, I always double and triple check, are we cleared to do this? Do you have permission from the publisher? And I'm asking the library for this permission. I also want to make sure that we have something in writing, right? So either a contract between me and the library saying that you're holding me harmless against any copyright infringement, because you got to realize, at the end of the day, whoever's hiring you to actually do the work, if they're telling you, we want you to make a song just like this reference track, and they say, use the same chord progression, use the same drums, and make something really similar, and you're kind of feeling like, well, I'm getting a little close to the original, it's really on you to protect yourself, okay? You can't just assume that they're going to protect you just because they're giving you the directions. A lot of libraries will have you sign contracts that actually hold them. It's called an indemnification clause, which actually holds them harmless, meaning they are not liable if you commit copyright infringement on your track. So if you throw unauthorized samples into your music and get it into their library, they get sued. A lot of that stuff actually will come right back to you, and they will say, hey, you signed a contract saying if you commit copyright infringement, we're not liable for that. So I've had one situation where I was asked to basically write sort of cover versions of popular tracks. And right before I did that, I said, well, hold on. If we're going to be making tracks that are just like, or basically identical, like karaoke versions of pop tracks, I need something in writing saying that I'm not liable for that if we get in trouble, if somebody comes down the pipeline and says, hey, you don't have authorization to do this. So I made sure that I got something in writing, a contract between me and the library saying, hey, Jesse, don't worry about it. Like, if something happens, we got this contract in writing. You have to do that for yourself, okay? You can't ever just assume that you're just protected because somebody's giving you those instructions, okay? You should always think about being your own sort of lawyer in a way, right? Always making sure that if this gets into trouble, am I protected? Always be having that in the back of your head. And of course, you know that when you're composing tracks, even if you do use a reference track, you're going to create your own melody. You're going to create like new chord progressions and make it your own. You guys already know that even using reference tracks doesn't mean you get to just copy and paste it. If you're doing it for yourself and you never release it, okay, for practice, that's one thing. But if you're actually going to get it released out there, you got to make it sound different enough that it's like, okay, it's in the spirit, it's in the style of that track, but it's not a rip-off, it's not taking all of that. And to me, what I find is that you can use pretty much the same drums, you can use the same BPM pattern, that kind of thing, but when it comes to the chord progression, the rhythm, the melody, the lead, that kind of stuff, that's where you're really going to start to run into problems, because if your chord progression and synths or whatever it is, the guitar sound just like the reference and your lead is like the same, but like you change one note, no, you're way too close. You got to make sure that when somebody listens to it, they go, this kind of sounds like that song, but that's as close as you could get people to it, okay? It shouldn't be like, that is that sound, but you just changed one note. That's when you know you're just far too close. Of course, this is all gray area stuff. There isn't any sort of like, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there. People say, well, as long as you use only like 5 seconds of their melody, you're good. No, there's no law or no rule like that. Basically, how it works is, in the spirit of the law, that if you write something that is so similar that it could confuse a consumer, it's kind of like trademark infringement. So if I started a hamburger joint and I called mine McDonald's Burgers and I used a big yellow M, I'm sort of potentially trying to confuse the customers, because if they just at a first glance look at it, they go, oh, McDonald's, let's go get some food. and I'm not McDonald's, I'm McDonald. But so that's the spirit of why trademark and copyright infringement exists, because you shouldn't be trying to confuse the customer as to who you really are and what your product really is. Okay, so if you're writing a track that's like almost identical to somebody else's music, you could potentially be confusing customers, and they could actually come and buy your track when they really think that they're getting the real deal. They're getting the actual original creator of that track. That's kind of the spirit of the copyright law that's been created. So it's designed actually to kind of protect consumers in many ways as well, just to make sure that they're not going into, Starbucks coffee and getting some coffee that's like, this tastes a little bit different, and not like getting into that kind of thing, because obviously, that a lot of people would obviously take advantage of that if there were no law probably against that. They would probably just start a bunch of competing, businesses that look very similar to the really popular one, and probably a lot of people would get confused. Same thing with online, making some website that looks like another website, but it's really not the same thing, because obviously it takes, let's say like somebody, Amazon.com obviously has earned a reputation for being, if you buy something, you get it, and, you're probably not going to deal with a lot of ripoffs or people sending you bad stuff or whatever. So Amazon has spent time and energy building credibility. So if you went to a different website called amazone.com or something, and they had the same sort of kind of logo, same layout, you might get this sensation of like, oh, I'm protected. Amazon is good, right? But it's not the same company. Amazon actually was the one that earned that reputation of being a reliable place to buy products and get services from. This new company is just using all of that effort and energy that Amazon put into it to benefit themselves. And so it's the same thing essentially with copyright. So, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that obviously, a big part of being in the licensing business is using reference tracks and trying to sound like a popular chart track. I mean, that's just, you can't get around that part of this business. It's a really huge part of it. Most of the time what happens is, a music supervisor is putting together a TV show or a commercial, and they love the latest artists, the latest pop artists, R&B artists, hip hop artists, and they're like, oh, we love this Drake song, we want to put this in our thing. It's going to cost $60,000 to just sync license that, or $100,000 or more. We could probably get something that's a little bit different, right? And in the same style, spirit, kind of the same feel, but we might be able to get something different. And usually that's where you come in. That's where I've come in so many times in my career. It's like, hey, Jesse, bail us out. We don't want to pay 60 grand. We'll pay you a good amount. Definitely not 60 grand for it, but they definitely will pay for something that's like in the spirit of the track that they want. Now, that's obviously a whole nother issue. I should probably make other videos about that, because it's tricky enough. Like, because if they fall in love with a reference track or a track from a pop artist, and then they hire you to go make that replacement, that's really hard to sell that to them. They're like, hey, you're going to love this track better than the real one you wanted. It's really, really hard to do. It's obviously, it can be done, but you just have to come into those sort of gigs with that sensibility, knowing it's a tall order, right? Because they're looking at a pop track that they love, they can't afford it, and they're going to look for something that could be a suitable replacement, which is, it's an uphill battle. I can just tell you that from experience, and other people who do custom work, they know that as well. It's definitely an uphill battle. So you do have to do, there's some techniques you can do to basically sell it a little bit better so that they fall in love with it. And a big part of that is actually providing a couple of options. People love having 2 or 3 options. If you just give them one thing, they kind of feel like they're stuck with it. But if you can give them, hey, try this or that, and you kind of know one of them is going to be a little bit more what they want, and the other one's just there just to kind of give a little bit of a, well, you got an option, but obviously one of them just now by comparison seems much more appropriate. They typically get a lot more satisfied that way. So there's a lot of like kind of psychological things you can do to help push, your music on there and make sure that they're happy with it. So it's just a kind of a really important issue to protect yourself with. I would hate to hear of anybody getting sued because they're like, well, I don't know, they told me to make this, and it's like, I thought I was protected. You got to take responsibility for yourself, for your own legal protection, and copyright infringement is definitely a thing that can happen and does happen in the music licensing business. But if you're smart, if you're asking for paperwork, if you protect yourself, you shouldn't run into any of these kind of issues at all.